The wind howled through the dense trees, carrying with it the sharp scent of smoke and earth. It was a bitter cold night. A crackling fire lit up the shadows, casting eerie figures in the distance. Her heartbeat pounded in her chest, louder than the wind. She had no idea how she got here, no idea what was happening. The rough ropes that bound her wrist dug into her skin, sending a sharp pain through her arms with every frantic movement. The air was thick, heavy with fear and uncertainty. Above her, the night sky was a blanket of stars, but they offered no comfort. Only the relentless rhythm of hooves echoed in the silence. She could hear them now, so close, so real, like a stampede heading straight toward her. Her breath caught in her throat, but she dared not scream. The Comanche had made it clear. If she made a sound, it would be the last thing she ever did. Don't make a sound or they will hear you. The voice was low, rough, almost like the wind itself. It was coming from behind her, but she couldn't turn to look. Her captors had been too quick, too silent. Now they were taking her deeper into the wilderness, away from everything she knew, away from the safety of her world. She felt the tension in the air, the electricity of an unknown fate hovering over her, and wondered what lay ahead. The sound of hooves grew louder, and with each beat, the darkness felt thicker. The earth beneath her feet was cold and unforgiving. The air was alive with the scent of damp leaves and burning wood. Suddenly, the hooves stopped. The silence was suffocating. She could feel their presence, hovering, watching. And then a voice broke the quiet. It was the voice of a man, a leader, commanding and powerful. Bring her forward. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew what that meant. The war would begin soon. If she didn't comply, her people would be at the mercy of the Comanche. A marriage, a bond forged in desperation, was her only chance to prevent the chaos that was about to unravel. But as she was forced to her feet and dragged forward, her mind raced. How had it come to this? How had she become a pawn in a game she didn't understand? And the biggest question of all, would she ever find a way to escape this nightmare? Or would she be trapped forever, caught between love, duty, and a future she couldn't control? The sun was setting over the harsh, unforgiving desert, casting long shadows across the barren land. It was a place where the wind never stopped howling, sweeping sand across the earth and carrying with it whispers of forgotten stories. The sun, a blinding ball of fire, dipped lower into the horizon, staining the sky with reds and oranges that seemed to bleed into one another. In the distance, jagged mountain peaks loomed like silent sentinels, guarding the edge of civilization. Amelia Dero stood at the edge of the cliff, her silhouette stark against the fading light. Her long dark hair whipped around her face, tangled and wild, much like the thoughts racing through her mind. She could feel the weight of the world pressing on her chest. Each breath was a reminder of the impossible choices she had to make. Behind her, the small frontier town of Fort Laram looked like nothing more than a collection of wooden shacks, the flicker of candlelight barely visible through the dust-choked air. The land, once teeming with settlers and the promise of wealth, had now become a place of endless conflict, a lawless stretch of earth where danger was as constant as the dust storms. Outlaws roamed freely, and the Native American tribes, once allies, were now locked in a bitter struggle with the encroaching settlers. Political tensions simmered just below the surface, and everyone in Fort Laram had to walk a fine line between survival and surrender. Amelia had once believed she could escape this world of bloodshed and betrayal, that she could carve out a life for herself away from the violence that surrounded her. But she knew deep down that this land didn't care for dreams. It only cared about power. And that was why she had ended up here, staring out into the endless desert, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. For years, Amelia had carried with her a wound that no one could see, an emotional scar that had festered deep within her. It was a wound from her past, one that had shaped her into the woman she had become. Strong, determined, yet haunted by the ghosts of her choices. She had been born into a family of wealth and privilege in the East, but when tragedy struck, when her father's land was lost and her mother succumbed to illness, she had been forced to flee. Alone, she had ventured westward, hoping for a fresh start in a world that promised opportunity. But instead of finding freedom, she had stumbled into a web of alliances and conflicts that had been centuries in the making. Her fear now was not just for her life, but for the people she had come to care about, her friends, her family, the fragile peace that still held in the town of Fort Laram. And then there was the chief, the one she was meant to marry. His name was Wakara, a powerful leader of the Comanche, a man whose name alone could stir the blood of any settler or soldier. Fierce and proud, His reputation was as vast as the plains themselves. Yet, despite all that she had heard of him, she knew little about the man beneath the war paint and the fearsome tales. She only knew that he was a man with a plan that, if fulfilled, would bring peace to the land or destruction. The tension had been building for months now. The Comanche tribe had been raiding nearby settlements, and the military was preparing to retaliate. A full-scale war was on the horizon. Amelia's family, still influential in the region, despite their losses, had made an impossible decision to prevent bloodshed and secure an uneasy peace. She would marry Wakara, binding her fate to his people and her future to the heart of the conflict. As she stood there on the edge of the cliff, her eyes narrowing against the wind, she could feel the eyes of the world upon her. Everyone in Fort Laramie had their opinions about the upcoming marriage. Some saw it as a noble sacrifice, others as a betrayal. But to Amelia it was a nightmare, a political maneuver that would strip her of everything she had fought for. She was not some pawn to be played in the hands of powerful men, but that's exactly what she was about to become. But even as the weight of the world pressed down on her, there was a spark of something else, something she didn't want to face, the smallest glimmer of curiosity. Could she really do this? Could she, the daughter of a once proud family, really take on the role of a wife to a man like a man whose culture and ways were as foreign to her as the desert itself? Her breath hitched as a memory surfaced. She'd been younger then, just a girl, but she remembered the scar on her wrist, hidden beneath the sleeve of her dress. The scar she had never told anyone about. It was the mark of something she had never shared, a forbidden secret, a part of her past that tied her to a different world, a different life. What was the price of peace? Was she willing to sacrifice herself, her future, her very soul for the sake of it? And if she did, what kind of woman would she become? The sound of hooves in the distance snapped her from her thoughts. She turned sharply, her heart skipping a beat as she saw the silhouette of a rider approaching. It was him, Walker. As he drew closer, she could see his face, the sharp angles, the deep-set eyes that seemed to look right through her. And for the first time, Amelia realized that the danger wasn't just in the future. It was here, it was now, it was the unspoken promise of a life she was about to enter. And that was only the beginning. Amelia stood in the shadow of the wooden fort, her body taut with nerves as the sun dipped lower, casting a red glow over the land. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood, a distant fire from the village that was nothing more than a whisper of smoke on the horizon. She could hear the low hum of murmurs from the town behind her, soldiers moving in the distance, preparing for the worst. There was something in the air, an unspoken tension, the feeling that the calm before the storm had lasted too long, and now something was coming. Her hands trembled as she clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders. She had been prepared for many things, the marriage to Walker, the political maneuvering, the whispers of betrayal. But what she had not prepared for was this, the waiting, the endless anticipation that nodded at her like a predator circling its prey. Suddenly, the silence shattered. A shout echoed across the open plains, followed by the sound of galloping hooves. Her heart raced, and she spun around, her eyes searching the horizon. A small party of riders appeared through the haze, riding hard toward the fort. At first, she thought it was just a group of settlers returning from a nearby town, perhaps unaware of the tensions that were building. But as they neared, Amelia's stomach dropped. These were not settlers. These were Comanche. A knot of panic twisted in her chest. She had seen enough to know that their appearance could mean only one thing. The storm had arrived early, and it wasn't a peaceful arrival. She could see the war paint on their faces, the fierce, unyielding look in their eyes. The lead rider, tall, broad-shouldered, and fierce, held his gaze on her, and for a moment, Amelia's breath caught in her throat. Wakara, he had come. But why? Was he here for her, or was this a new wave of aggression? Before she could react, the riders surrounded her, blocking off any escape. Her pulse quickened, her mind racing to make sense of the chaos. She had been prepared for many things, but not this. Not the violence she had read about in stories, not the suddenness of it. Amelia Devo, a deep voice rumbled from behind her. She froze. It was Wakara, his presence like a shadow looming over her. His words were not a question, but a command. She turned slowly, her eyes locking with his. There was something in his gaze, something dark, something that made her blood run cold. He was no longer the distant figure from the stories. He was here now, and whatever was happening, it was far from what she had expected. "You know why I'm here," he said, his voice low and firm. "This marriage, this union, it must happen now." Amelia's heart thudded painfully in her chest. This was it, the moment that would change everything. She had known it was coming, but the reality of it, the weight of it, was suffocating. She had not expected it to feel this urgent, this inevitable. But before she could speak, a shout rang out. A man on horseback rode toward them, a look of fury in his eyes. He was young, barely out of his teens, but his face was set in a hard mask of determination. Behind him, another rider appeared, an older man, his face lined with age and wisdom, his eyes sharp and calculating. Amelia recognized him instantly. It was Chief Hokan, the leader of the rival Comanche faction that had been in a blood feud with Walker's people for years. Walker's expression darkened as Chief Hokan approached, his horse slowing to a trot. "You come here to my land to claim what is mine." Hokan's voice was like gravel, thick with disdain. "You think you can just take her, take everything." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She realized too late what this was, what was happening. This was no longer just a political marriage. This was a power struggle, a conflict between two men, two tribes, and her caught in the middle. Wakara's eyes flicked to Amelia, and for a brief moment, she saw something else in his gaze. A flicker of uncertainty, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the cold, unyielding leader she had heard so much about. "I take what I am owed," Wakara responded, his voice cold and commanding, "and the woman is mine. If you stand in my way, you will regret it." The wind howled, the tension hanging thick in the air, and Amelia could feel her heart hammering in her chest. She had no idea what to do. She couldn't fight them. She couldn't escape. But she also couldn't be forced into a marriage like this, could she? Before she could even form a thought, Chief Hokan's men dismounted, surrounding the group with weapons drawn. The air was electric, crackling with the promise of violence. "You think this is over?" Hokan spat, his eyes blazing with fury. "You think you can take her and leave without consequence? This is war." The words sent a chill through Amelia's spine. She had been brought to the edge of a precipice, and now there was no turning back. The war that had simmered for years was about to ignite, and she, caught between two powerful men, was the spark. Wakara's hand moved to his side, fingers brushing the hilt of a knife. His expression hardened, but there was no fear in him, only cold calculation. He had come for her, and he was not going to leave empty. Amelia felt a hand on her arm, pulling her away from the chaos, from the impending bloodshed. She twisted in the grip, fear coursing through her veins. She wanted to run, to scream, to fight for her life. But in that moment, she realized there was no escape. The world around her was shifting, breaking apart, and she was right in the center of it all. "Come with me," the voice whispered again. But this time, Amelia didn't trust it. The storm was coming, and it was going to tear everything apart. The moon was a thin, fragile crescent in the night sky, barely offering any light against the darkness that stretched out over the desert. Amelia had no idea how long they had been riding, but the ache in her muscles told her it had been hours. The wind whipped around her, biting at her exposed skin, but she barely felt it. There was no warmth in this journey, no comfort, just a cold, relentless desert that seemed to stretch forever, an unforgiving landscape that would be her grave if she didn't find a way to survive. Wakara's horse was just ahead of her, and the rhythm of the galloping hooves beneath her own seemed to match the frantic pace of her heart. She kept her eyes fixed on his back, but even in the dim light, she could feel his presence. It was like a weight pressing down on her, a constant reminder of her situation. She had been dragged into this journey by forces beyond her control, and there was no escape now. The Comanche had not spoken a word since they'd left Fort Laramie. The other riders flanked them in silence, a tight formation that made her feel both watched and hunted. There was no room for rebellion, no room for any sort of negotiation. She was a captive, not a companion, and she couldn't even begin to comprehend the full extent of the peril she was in. The events of the past few hours had been a blur. The confrontation with Chief Hokan, the sudden violence that had almost erupted between the two factions, the forced choice she had been given, the one she hadn't truly chosen at all. She had been dragged from her life in Fort Laramie, away from any semblance of control. She had been promised peace through marriage, but it was a lie. Peace was the last thing she would find on this journey. The harsh reality of it all hit her when she saw the first signs of their destination. A small, almost invisible settlement, nestled between jagged rock formations, hidden from prying eyes. It was no town, but more of a fortified camp, a place where outlaws and soldiers alike came to hide, to trade, to make deals that had no place in the official world. It was a place where alliances were made and broken in the blink of an eye, where loyalty meant nothing. As they neared the camp, Amelia's thoughts began to swirl. What was Wakara's real plan? He hadn't explained much, and she couldn't trust him. The more time she spent in his presence, the more she realized that there was something beneath the surface, something dangerous. But it wasn't just him. It was the entire world around her. Everyone seemed to have their own agenda, and Amelia was just a pawn caught in the middle. Her eyes flicked to the rider beside her, Zion, one of Walker's most trusted warriors. He was young, barely more than a boy, but the hardness in his eyes suggested years of experience. He had said little to her, but his gaze never left her for too long. He seemed to be observing her closely, like she was a puzzle he hadn't quite solved. "You are strong," Zion said suddenly, his voice low and rough, his accent thick. It was the first time he had spoken directly to her since the journey began. Amelia looked at him, startled. She had expected indifference at best, hostility at worst. "What do you mean? You have fought this fate from the beginning. You resist him, resist all of us." His eyes flickered to Wakara, who rode just ahead, oblivious. "That strength will either kill you or make you stronger than any of us." Amelia tightened her grip on the reins, feeling a surge of conflicting emotions. Was he mocking her? Warning her? She couldn't tell. All she knew was that she couldn't trust anyone. Not him, not Wakara, not any of them. Not when her life was on the line. But it was hard to ignore the way Zion's gaze lingered on her. There was something almost protective in his manner. Something that made Amelia question whether there was more to this journey than simply a forced marriage. But no matter what, she couldn't allow herself to trust him or anyone. As they passed the first few tents of the camp, the murmur of voices grew louder. A handful of men stood near a fire, their faces obscured by shadows, but their eyes were sharp and watching. Amelia couldn't help but notice how they looked at her, like she was a prize, an object to be fought over. Wakara guided his horse to the center of the camp, and a few of his men began dismounting, preparing the area for the night. Amelia followed reluctantly, her mind racing. She had no idea what awaited her here, but she knew it couldn't be good. There was a sense of finality in the air, like this was the end of the road for her. She would either accept this fate, or fight and die. They didn't give her much time to think. "Rest," Wakara said, his voice cold as he gestured toward a blanket on the ground. "We leave at dawn." Amelia wanted to argue, to demand answers, but she could see it in his eyes. He wasn't interested in what she had to say. She was a pawn, and now she was just another prisoner to be kept quiet until she fulfilled her purpose. That night, the desert was eerily quiet. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of a tent flap in the breeze. Amelia lay on the rough blanket, staring at the stars overhead, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The journey had taken her far from everything she knew, and now she had to survive in a world where the rules were different, where survival meant bending to the will of those stronger than her. But Amelia wasn't like the others. She wasn't going to just bend. She couldn't. She had secrets of her own, things that could shift the balance of power if they were ever revealed. As she lay there trying to block out the feeling of being trapped, she noticed a shadow moving toward her. Her pulse quickened, her instincts screaming at her to be alert. It was Zion. "Do you want to know the truth about this journey?" "Here because of a political marriage, but there's more at play. Wakara's people are at war with Hokun's tribe, but there's a third faction, one that neither side knows about. And you are more important to this war than you think." Amelia felt her breath catch. She had suspected there was something else, something deeper, but she hadn't dared to believe it. "What does that mean?" she asked urgently, her voice barely audible. Zion's eyes were shadowed, unreadable, but his lips curved into a faint, almost bitter smile. "You'll find out soon enough, but be careful, Amelia. Not everyone is who they seem." And then, before she could respond, he melted back into the shadows, leaving her alone with her racing thoughts and the rising dread in her chest. The stakes had just been raised, and Amelia realized with a sinking feeling that she was in far deeper than she had ever imagined. Now there was no turning back. The journey was just beginning. 2:39 p.m. April 3rd, 2025. Farah Muhammad, the desert sun, was merciless the next morning, its heat almost unbearable. Amelia sat in silence, exhausted but alert. Zion's whispered words haunted her. "You're more important than you think." What did he mean? She wasn't a warrior, just a woman trapped in a war she didn't understand. Walker's people and Hokun's tribe were at war, and her marriage to Wakara was meant to be a peace offering. But Zion's warning hinted at something deeper. As camp stirred, Amelia noticed Wakara in intense discussion with his warriors. Then his cold voice rang out, "We leave immediately." The finality in his tone sent a chill through her. They rode for hours until the desert gave way to a hidden valley, lush and green. But waiting for them were 2:40 p.m. April 3rd, 2025. Farah, Muhammad. The valley erupted into chaos. Horses reared, arrows flew, and steel clashed. The tranquil oasis had become a battlefield in an instant. Amelia barely registered the warning before the ambush struck. Wakara's men scrambled, but the attack was too precise, too overwhelming. Amid the chaos, her gaze met Zion's intense, unreadable. "Amelia, get behind me," he shouted, cutting through enemies with brutal precision. But she didn't listen. Gripping a spear, she fought, untrained yet desperate to survive. Then pain. An arrow pierced her side, sending her crashing to the ground. Blood soaked her clothes. As the world blurred, Zion's panicked voice reached her, his hands hovering over her wound. "Hold on," he pleaded, but she saw the truth in his eyes. 2:40 p.m. April 3rd, 2025. Farah Muhammad. With a trembling hand, she gripped his arm. "Walker, he's not who he says." A hand wrenched her up, cold steel at her throat. "You're a liability," the attacker sneered. Zion lunged. Amelia kicked, knocking the dagger loose. In a heartbeat, Zion pinned the attacker. But the battle wasn't over. Wakara stood watching, unreadable. Then his voice rang out, "Finish it." But before the killing blow, the ground rumbled. A new force had arrived. Walker's men faltered. "Retreat," he ordered, but it was too late. The reinforcements stormed in. Zion pulled Amelia to safety. But then she saw it. Zion, bloodied, fighting alongside the attackers. Betrayal. Her breath hitched. Zion had never been her ally. He was the enemy. The final confrontation loomed. But who would pay the ultimate price? The answer was as uncertain as the desert sands. The sun bled into the horizon, casting a crimson glow over the battlefield. Smoke and death choked the air. The once pristine oasis, now a graveyard of fallen warriors. The ground trembled with the clash of steel and the thunder of hooves. Amelia, battered and bleeding, barely kept pace with the chaos. But nothing hurt more than Zion's betrayal. The man she trusted, the man she fought beside, had become her enemy. Through the wreckage, she spotted him, his sword slick with blood, his eyes locked onto hers. A flicker of something crossed his face. Regret, pain, it didn't matter. She stumbled forward, her ribs screaming where the arrow had struck, but she refused to falter. Zion raised his sword, the fading light glinting off the blade. "Amelia," his voice was low, almost mournful. "It's too late. It's over." "No," she shot back. "You made it over." With a surge of strength, she lunged. The clash of metal rang through the valley, the force of his counterattack nearly knocking her off balance. He was stronger, faster, but she had something he didn't: the will to survive. Steel met steel, each blow more desperate than the last. Then, for the briefest moment, hesitation flickered in Zion's gaze. "You don't have to do this," she pleaded. "This isn't you." His grip tightened. "I'm sorry." The battle reached its peak. Amelia, breathless and aching, saw her chance. She sidestepped, her spear grazing his arm. Blood spattered the earth, but Zion didn't flinch. Summoning every last ounce of strength, she struggled. But Zion caught her arm, twisting it brutally. Pain seared through her. She gasped, but refused to surrender. With a final desperate move, she drove her elbow into his chest. He staggered. She didn't hesitate. The spear found its mark, sinking deep into his side. Zion gasped, collapsing as his sword clattered to the ground. His wide eyes met hers, filled with something she couldn't name. Then silence. Amelia stood over him, panting, her body shaking. The battle raged on around her, but in that moment, she understood the true cost of war. The fight was won, but the war had just begun. The battlefield lay silent, the echoes of war fading into the dusk. Amelia stood amidst the wreckage, battered and bloodied, her breath unsteady. At her feet, Zion's lifeless body lay still, his face frozen in sorrow. She had won, but at what cost? Orlia approached, her gaze steady, offering no judgment. "You did what you had to," she murmured. Amelia couldn't reply. Grief, relief, and guilt warred within her. They turned from the ruins of battle, stepping into an uncertain future. At camp, The wounded and weary remained, but so did hope. Her people had survived, yet one question haunted her. Had Zion truly been a traitor, or a pawn in a larger game? The truth lay buried, but not forever. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a shadow stirred in the distance. Someone was watching. The war was far from over.